Brothels in the American West of the late 1880s would not meet today's hygiene standards. Bathing was infrequent, and there were no effective treatments for STDs. Perfume was used to mask body odors, somewhat. Prostitution was not a respectable trade for women, so the prostitutes we see in today's Wild West fiction movies are just that, fiction. Women arrived in the Wild West before it became the West, and no, we're not referring to the spouses and mothers of the early pioneers. We are discussing the madams, ladies of the lines, and white doves who employed the oldest profession in the world to tame the Wild West. Welcome to History Rediscovered. In this episode, we discuss the filthy brothels of the Wild West. The Wild West was known as the Sad West before women made their way to the frontier, since the settlements back then weren't actually towns. They were merely tent and hole-filled communities. Men have holes for sleeping, holes for going potty in the morning, and holes for dying. In reality, these settlements were just basic work camps with no concept of domestic life at all. These were and there were stringent gender laws. Therefore, for these men, having a home was only a faraway fantasy without women. In fact, the situation was so bad that men would frequently switch around between dressing as ladies to console one another, or spending a fortune only to get their hands on a pair of women's underwear or catch a glimpse of a feminine ankle. When women first came to the West, they encountered many desperate males and a glaring business opportunity. These ladies realized there was a high demand for love on the frontier and that there was simply no supply until they gave it to them, because there was no civilization in the Wild West to criticize them. In the 1800s, the only jobs available for women that went this far out were teaching positions, which earned a pitiful $80 a year. And that was the highest paying position available. Other employment options were those for manufacturing employees, clerks, and laundresses. They were able to be independent by working in brothels, and most of the women in this profession made more money than the males who were their clients. The introduction of sheets and the subsequent influx of women transformed the arid but testosterone-heavy camps into thriving, fertile towns. As the cowboys' financial plight worsened, the women quickly amassed cash and exploited it to establish a market system. At the Wild West, madams frequently ran general stores, hospitals, and schools. Some even donated funds to help build churches where men might go to make amends for spending time with the madams' girls at the saloon. Cities and villages in the Wild West began to spring up as a result of all these new structures. Madams had land, wealth, and influence, but many of them utilized it to send orphans and low-income children to school, offer assistance during the American Civil War, and offer shelter during natural disasters. In reality, Wyoming became the first territory to grant women the right to vote in 1869 thanks to the influence of the saloon girls. Nevertheless, keep in mind that the suffrage campaign didn't start in the rest of America until 1920. The 1869 Wyoming suffrage statute was undoubtedly too obscene for the rest of America, but Wyoming threatened to leave the Union if the men in Washington, D.C. couldn't stand the idea of women voting. Uncle Sam withdrew their demand for the abolition of the suffrage statute due to a bruised male ego. The idea of an equality state gained popularity as a result of the Wild West's brothels, and the next 8 states to approve suffrage legislation were all from the West. In the Wild West, the saloon, a dance hall, a crib, a posh parlor house, or even the street could serve as the office of dirty doves. The Wild West is where these saloons had their modest start. Until buildings started to appear, the wagons these women arrived in as passengers had to do. White doves had complete legitimacy regarding the explicit nature of their business, and enjoyed protection functioning directly under the noses of the authorities in both incorporated and unorganized territories, because of the political clout maintained by madams. The towns were little, though, and people, well, humans, have a propensity to populate pretty quickly. There would be some evenings when the number of patrons in these saloons and parlors would exceed the number of beds available. The only legal protection available to the ladies of the line was frequently the right to operate as sealing specialists. That wasn't a term their consumers used back then in a professional sense. We weren't making a joke about these women. In the West, violence against these working girls was extremely common. First of all, regulations protecting women's dignity were not very effective, especially if they worked as parlor girls. The majority of the time, women were hesitant or reluctant to report consensual situations because they were aware that their allegations would not be taken seriously and that, once published, the news of their tragedy would become local law. Another risk at work was fear of dying. Men occasionally developed a possessive attitude toward women or made unreasonable demands. It was essential for a madam to be able to start fights or protect your daughters from predatory guys. Madame Belgian Jenny passed away as a result of her ex-boyfriend, who showed no mercy despite the fact that she was already injured. Don't think any longer that ladies were safe around nice, generous customers. These working women in saloons and parlors were actually in risk from a more subtle and severe threat. In the 1800s, venereal illnesses were common, and the cures for them were just as risky as the infections themselves. Because penicillin hadn't yet been developed, these women were always at risk when working as parlor or bar girls. Therefore, it was crucial for a madam that their girls maintain good health. Their excellent establishment's reputation could be tarnished by a single rumor. To ensure they were free from diseases, many madams would push their facility to have monthly doctor visits and checkups. Additionally, they will watch out for the ladies' daily 2 nutritious meals and commitment to good cleanliness, so that they won't in any way seem sickly. Early versions of the diaphragm and rubber, both of which were created during the Wild West era, were both made available but very expensively in the West. According to some estimates, 20% of these employees became mothers at some time during their professional lives. In the life of a bar girl, pregnancies were frequent and typically unwanted. It was detrimental to their careers. But preventing pregnancy was also difficult. Syringes used to inject mercury, arsenic, and vinegar into the body to prevent pregnancy or to cure sexual diseases have been discovered during an archaeological investigation at a location from the early Wild West. The Comstock Act of 1873 made things worse for the working women of the West since it compelled them to use homemade medicines, which frequently didn't work. Toxic compounds, frequently derived from plant sources, were present in the medications they were made to take in order to prevent unintended pregnancies. It will never be known how many babies were actually born to working girls in the Old West. Some women, generally madams, were at least able to retire. Of all of them, Sally Stanford is undoubtedly the most well-known. After retiring, Sally entered politics, and after 5 failed efforts, she was elected to Sausalito's city council. Later, she was chosen as the town's mayor. She smirked in response to the question about why she ran for a 5th time and said, "We sinners never give up."